Hello and welcome back to WTF MCP, where we tell you everything that we know about Marvel Crisis Protocol, which is not a lot and not great. So take that for what you will. Yeah, Tim France is with me again from the Professional Casual Network. If you guys haven't seen any of our earlier episodes, Tim's got a great network set up of all kinds of different content, but specifically they have a ton of great MCP content. They do MCP streams. You guys are amazing, so I love plugging your work.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much. Always
Yeah.
happy to be here.
And yeah, so we're back. And today, Timmy, we're gonna talk about this is going to be our list 101 episode, list building 101
hmm
episode, and we're just going to kind of get you at home started in the world of list building. And I don't know about you, Tim, but like now that people know I'm like obsessed with MCP and they've seen our beginner series here, I
Yeah.
get the question of like a lot of different questions about list building. And so I was like, all right, we just got to do a few
Oh, absolutely.
episodes on
Well, and
this.
with any minis game, right? It's one of the most intimidating things if you've
Yeah,
come from any other miniatures game.
right.
Like if
Yeah.
you're used to having to count up points for a GW thing or whatnot and make sure people are equipped with this particular array or whatnot, like
Yep.
guess what? It's going to be a lot simpler than
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you do not need a calculator. It helps, sure. If you can't count on your fingers, which I can't, so I use a TI-81 when I roster build for this.
Oh,
But
nice. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
perfect. Yeah, I mean, the first question I always get is where do I start? Right? And I
hmm
think the answer to that, the first answer I always give, which for those of you that have been watching our series, we've kind of already given this answer, but is, well, what's the event you're playing?
correct.
Right? Or what's the rules you and your opponent are playing? Is it just regular free for all? Are you playing affiliation? Are you playing timeline? What are you playing first? Let's start there.
Right. So, and the good news is that a lot of the roster building for any one of those formats is going to be pretty similar, unless it's an affiliation battle. But then you can still kind of build it pretty straightforward as
Yeah.
well.
Well, and I think that's the other thing too, right? Like there's two ways really you can start, which we're going to do today. We're going to walk you kind of through affiliation and like how that, starting with a leader for an affiliation and building out from there. But honestly, you don't even really need to do that, right? Because you don't have to
Correct.
have an affiliation. It's just to get off affiliation leaderships is
hmm
basically all that's for. So really, if you wanted to play Spider-Man, Green Goblin, Wilson Fisk, Captain America, and Daredevil, like you
Yep.
honestly could do that. It just doesn't matter.
Yeah. Throw on a sentinel. Who cares?
Yeah,
Let's
right.
go.
Yeah, yeah. Like if you just like, I don't know, just a bunch of guys showed up and started punching things. Um, it's okay.
It is. I think a great way to start is to kind of choose, like, hey, what type of Marvel do I like? Do I like spider people? Do I like mutants? Do I
Yeah.
like bad mutants? Do I like good mutants? The Inhumans, She Hulk and the A Force, the Avengers. I mean, it's a real target rich environment for you to
Yeah.
find something that, like, hey, I dig these guys. These are the ones I want to play, but you're not locked into just playing those, which is really cool.
Yeah, agreed. And I would say if you don't know what affiliate, like if you're not sure and you just got a core set, right? Like let's say you just picked up one of either the original core set or the new starter set, Avengers. Like just go whether or not you're into them, Avengers are just easy to pick up and it's a
Yeah.
great way to learn the game overall because um there's other affiliations and leaderships have some more complicated interactions, and Avengers is pretty straightforward and they're just like a rock'em sock'em kind of affiliation. So you could get them on the table, start doing what playing, and
hmm
there's not a lot of triggers and things that you have to like remember all the time.
And they have a lot of versatility in them too.
Yeah.
So starting with Avengers, they have a kind of a plethora of different leaders, and that both core boxes also come with the ability to run Cabal, which is effectively, the
Yep.
inverse of Avengers. And same thing there. They're versatile. There's a lot of options there, but they're also a great place to start because their
Yep.
mechanics are pretty straightforward and still relevant.
That yes, that's huge, right? Both
Yeah.
Cabal and Avengers. Like, okay, if we're gonna talk, if you're a competitive player from another scene, we could talk meta for 1 second. both Avengers and Cabal play well into the meta. So if you
Hmm.
start with those, you could continue going with those competitively and still be reasonably well suited to fight any list out there, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The next big question that I always get, Tim, is let's just stick with Avengers for the theme for right
Hmm.
now. But
Yeah.
there's multiple Captain Americas in Avengers. Can I have two of them in my roster?
You totally can. So while they can't be at the on the table at the same time, any one alias can only appear once in the show. But you can have three different Steve Rogers on your roster, a different one for different situations. Sometimes you need to punch bullies. Sometimes you want to help your friends, and other times, you also want to punch bullies, but in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah, and like the one thing I tell a lot of people is that when you're playing enough and you're kind of overplaying and playing, you have ten characters you could put on your roster. But honestly, like four of them are mostly just on there because you have to reach 10. There's
Mhm.
usually like six that you're playing in heavy rotation because they make sense to whatever's to what's going on the table. And so one of the things I always recommend is like you have Steve Rogers cap and then you have Sam Wilson cap. Well, put both of them in your list and then think about a completely different list that Sam would run, right?
Mhm.
Because he's really good at, like, if you have a bunch of like lower point level minions and you want to spread out and have a number of people on the table, where Steve Rogers, both of his you know both leaders, or well, there's three, but the two that matter, the two leaderships that matter, they both do well with more like powered, like Hulk and Iron Man, right? Whereas Sam is more like, oh, you're gonna play Black Widow, Winter Soldier, War Machine, Sam. That's more
Yeah.
of Sam's world. So I always recommend, like, maybe thinking of two different 5 to 6 man lists that you're going to put on the table, and then that's how you build your 10-person roster, is like almost two completely different lists, and then you just think about how each one of those wants to play, and then you've got plenty.
Yeah, it's very true. And even within the same affiliation, like you said,
Yeah,
right? So there's multiple Captain Americas. There's Sam, and there's also two Steves that are all leaders. So you can kind of be pretty versatile there. And like any good leader of the Avengers would be, they really kind of play nice with everybody.
yeah,
So you can go for big punchy, you can go wide with regular old Captain America as well. Everyone likes a discount on their superpowers, right? So you're never going to be in a bad spot there.
yeah.
Um, People have been calling, this is an old adage, but Steve from the first core box discount Steve, and that is not a dig on him at all. It's because he
Yeah.
provides everyone discounts.
Right.
But when you hear someone be like, "Oh yeah, they were running discount Steve," and it's like, no, that's not janky Steve. That's Steve that likes to make sure everyone has
Yep.
coupons.
Which, and a little aside is I played the new Steve, which lets you change. Basically, you spend a power and you could change one of your dice. Uh, but I've been playing Discount Steve a lot more, and I'm just like, oh God, I forgot how good he was. Like, it's so
It's
nice paying one less power to do something.
it's one of those things where yeah, you play a bunch of that Steve, and then you go and play anything else, and you're like, oh, all this costs like real dollars now. I don't
Yeah,
like
yeah.
this. Like,
And on top of it, I have to spend more power to change my die. It's like I didn't have enough power to begin with. Like,
but
um,
from top to bottom, effectively, you're picking 10 characters. That's
yep,
that's it. That's the standard. Those can be comprised of a lot of things. You're also going to be bringing 10 tactics cards and 6 crisis cards, and that's really all you need to show up
right.
to a game.
Yep. Yeah, and I think one of the things too that you want to look at as well, is when you're starting to build, and we'll stick with Avengers, but we can branch out. But looking at, let's say you pick Avengers, well, pick out the leaders for Avengers and try to like determine what their affiliation leadership, like what makes sense to you and what makes you feel good about like playing. So if you want to play Hulk or Thor, and you want to reduce power spend, then you would pick, discount Steve. If you want to actually, do be more aggressive and you want to get a lot more attacks, then you would pick the first Avenger Steve, which is going to let you spend some power. So it's kind of like taking a look at what the leaders do, and then trying to figure out how you can work other characters kind of cohesively with that leadership.
And yeah,
Yeah.
kind of to cycle back to something you said earlier about kind of picking a core six. So I think that's a great way to go about it. And then filling in those last four with just some characters you like. There's some great pieces and there's some great characters out there. So if you want to run Avengers and that's what you have access to, but you want Cyclops or Wolverine in there, or I always joke about a Sentinel, Modoc, something like that, you can still run a lot of your favorite characters while maintaining an affiliation somewhere else.
Yeah.
And that's kind of one of the big flex points there as far as your initial roster creation is focus on one thing, but
Yep.
just a little bit more than half. Know what you're going to be running on a regular basis and then fill in the rest with fun stuff or tech pieces.
Yeah, and one of the big things to when you're doing that, right, is to look at when you're looking at the the leader's wording. If it says allied character, some say affiliation, the affiliation
Mm-hmm.
character, that means only whoever's in that affiliation could spend it. But like someone like Cap says, each allied character can do that. So they don't need to be an affiliation. So they can be any splash character that you want, and they still get to work off of that power.
And thankfully, there's very few instances of having a leadership ability where it only affects affiliated characters.
Yeah.
The one that always comes to mind is Corvus Glaive has a card where he can become the leader of the Black Order.
Yeah.
And whenever they down something, it gives a benefit to only other specifically Black Order members.
Yeah, and
But it's
that's
it's it's rare, which is nice.
right. And then a lot of that's like in the tactics cards too. Like
Mhm.
if you run X-Men, a lot of their cards are X-Men can do this or affiliation X-Men. And so you got to just be careful when you're looking at that. But yeah, the big thing is really um starting with an affiliation that you think is interesting, figure out who their leaders are, and then take a look at their leaderships and then figure out what's the most interesting for you, and then start putting characters in there that match either with your interest or with the that leader's ability.
And so when you bring those characters into a game, you're going to want to make sure to maintain the affiliation
Yeah.
that you have more than 50% of your models of that affiliation. So making sure that you kind of have a variety of different threats between two, three, four, and
Yeah.
five of, and granted it goes higher than that, but making sure you have a good mix of those so you can meet any crisis that you're going to be going into while also having the characters to maintain that affiliation.
Yep.
So, and it doesn't need to be a lot. Having a two and a three is pretty much all you need to make sure that you're going to be able to hit
Yes.
any
Yeah.
threat
Yeah. Yeah.
level. But make sure you have at least an odd number in there.
Yeah, that's that because and I think this is where a lot of us fall in the trap. I've been there, right? Like, is you want to pick all the super cool, like amazing characters,
Mhm.
and generally speaking, they're going to be four or above, right? And
Yeah.
so from a threat level, and so you're gonna have to like in Avengers again, as an example, the original Black Widow, she's 2 points, right? She's a great place
Mhm.
to put to and she actually does work, and you got to look at them as what they can do for you. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Tim. Like a two and at least 1 2 and 1 3 in there.
Yeah.
That's really key.
The three is probably the most important because not
Yeah,
every affiliation has access to a two,
that's true.
but
That's true.
it's very easy to fall into the trap, especially with a lot of the new releases and over the past year and like the new Spider-Man or the new Spider Foes affiliation box too. You can very easily be like, oh, I only have fours because
Yeah.
all the fours are really good and that's what's been coming out. And you just hope, well, I really hope I'm playing at 16 or 20 threat exclusively.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so having that three in there really kind of goes a long way.
Yeah, and I mean the way to look at it is so your crisis cards 15 to 20, 15 comes up a lot, right? And
Mhm.
if you're like wanting to, like for instance, if we stay with Avengers here and you go Cap, Iron Man, Thor, well, you're already at that what's that? That's five. That's like 13, 12 or 13, like depending on which ones you pick. So now you gotta get to 15. So you either have to put a three or a two in there.
Yep.
to finish that
Correct.
out, right? Like, you could go below, not recommended. Try to hit the points, but like, that's
Mhm.
kind of the questions that you're gonna start walking up against. Is like, uh-oh, I don't know if I have the points to like finagle this.
Well, and that's kind of similar to the Tactus card selection too. Like, so that's the other thing that you're going to be bringing 10 Tactus cards, and it's actually very easy to get like your first kind of 4 or 5,
Yep,
similar to your roster, where your affiliation probably has some affiliation exclusive cards
yep,
that are only good for running that affiliation. And that will probably comprise like the first half, if not more, of your Tactus card selection out of your
yeah,
10 of those. And then you can fill in with a character card that's specific to one of the characters that you really like that you're going to be bringing, or a particular piece like Rhino, for instance, that you bring Rhino because he has a card that lets him steal real good
yeah.
and
Oh
then
yeah,
throw some people around. So, yeah, your first few pretty easy to get, keeping it in affiliation. Then there's some great cards out there like Brace for Impact or Patch Up that are restricted that are very popular because they're good for everybody. Yeah, you're very rarely in a
yeah.
situation where you're not going to benefit from them.
Yeah, and that's something you're going to want to pay attention to. And I think we've talked about this before, but with building lists, there are a number of cards that are what are called restricted, and so you can only bring two restricted cards with you. And so even to this day, I still like when if I'm not on like a list builder like Cerebro, there's a list builder called cerebromcp.com that you can use. And if I'm not on Cerebro and like putting tactics cards together, I have to like make sure I'm not like putting too many restricted because there's so many
Yeah.
like there's so many restricted cards they're all good. That's why they're restricted, right? So you start
Hmm.
like adding things in and you're like, oh, I'm gonna put Brace and Indomitable, and you're like, okay, and then you're like, and Patch Up, and then they're like, oh crap, those all three of those are
Yeah.
restricted. Like, oh man, or Sacrifice, right? Or Advanced R&D, like those
Hmm.
are those four are the like I think there's what 5 or 6, but those four are like the ones that are the most common, right? Which is
Yep.
for those of you who don't know, Sacrifice basically lets another character jump in the way and take a hit so that you could keep a character survive. Patch Up lets another character heal a character that's got a bunch of, got wounds on them.
Hmm.
Uh, Indomitable basically says that you can't be thrown or pushed. So if a character goes to throw or push you, you're like, nope, you can't. And then what was the other one? Brace.
Advanced R&D. Oh, and Brace. Yeah, Brace
Yeah,
is just real good. Someone throws something at you. No, not today.
yeah. Yeah, they don't suffer damage. So they can do it and the throw still happens, but you don't suffer the damage, which is cool. And then advanced R&D, uh, you get to choose any number of characters that gain a power based on how much power you spent for the
Hmm.
number of characters. So, they're all good. That's why they're restricted. So if you could put all those in your deck, it would be real bad.
Well, correct. Well, and you used to be able to, right? And that's why they
Right.
had to restrict them.
Yeah, yeah.
And that list gets updated. Some things get added, some things get removed. I actually don't think anything's been removed yet, but that we should see kind of maybe yearly, every 18 months,
Yeah.
something along those lines, updates to that particular list, or when it just needs addressing because a card becomes too prominent,
Right.
kind of in the scene. And an important distinction too, those two restricted cards are in the full roster. So not just you can't bring more than that and only bring two into the actual game itself. It's two in the entire list are allowed to be
Right.
restricted. And there are, I think the gems were recently removed. So maybe that is, I guess, an instance of them being removed.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, and then also just you could go to AMG's website for this, but there's about 20 banned cards too, which means
Mhm.
they're not allowed to see play at all. So you may find some like I think one is like Web Barrier, which came with Spider-Man and was it
Mhm.
Ghost Spider?
Yep.
And
Drop off was the big one.
yeah, Drop Off. Yeah, that one's crazy. That one was that was like the first one that got banned ever, right? Like they're like,
Yeah.
whoops, this one's gotta go.
I think it was the first one that got banned, and it was
Yeah.
like it was a big long. That was a big loss. Granted, we never played the card correctly because we can't read, but
Right,
like
right.
I can see after reading it now, or having it read to me. I mean, that yeah, there's a reason for that
Yeah.
being a little too strong.
Yeah.
Well, and field dressing was used to be a huge one that was in
Yeah.
every list where you could heal someone if they were dazed, you could bring them back. So you'd have someone like Hulk out there who you'd finally put down, and then Black Widow goes up, puts a band-aid on it, and Hulk's back awake and swinging again. And it's
Yeah.
like, oh,
Sun's getting
ah,
real low, big guy. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, and I think overall, and just kind of recap as we wind down here, start with your affiliation. That's the best way to go. Find a leader within that affiliation that either you like what they do as an affiliation leader or you just like them, period. Like,
Mhm.
Hulkbuster isn't a great leader for his leadership ability, but he's a cool model and he does some really neat stuff. So you may love Hulkbuster and want to just put him on the board, and that's fine. You just need a leader. Then you get at least you don't have to have half your 10-man squad has to be affiliated. It's just half of what you put on the table has to be
Mhm.
affiliated. So you could pick 3 Avengers. You could pick Cap, Iron Man, and Thor, and then the rest of your 7, if you're always planning on playing those 3, and then the
Yep.
rest of your 7 could just be whoever you want.
And that would be kind of the last tip there too. Like if you're used to playing a particular subset of your roster, and there's these 4 characters that you kind of standardly want to bring, with your crisis cards, make sure that you have that threat
Yeah.
in your
Yeah.
roster as a whole,
Yeah.
because you're going to be bringing 3 secures and 3 extracts, but you're only going to be using one of those sets for the game that you play because you use one with your opponent. So making sure if you do like Thor, Cap, and Iron Man, that you're making sure that you have a bunch or as many as you can of objectives that are going to like help you play the actual roster you want to be
Yeah.
running.
Right. Yeah, right. Because if you basically if you lose the roll off and your opponent gets to choose what cards they're using, you get to choose how many points. So as long as all your cards match what you want point wise, you should be in good shape. But always
Hmm.
prepare with that 2 or 3.12 to know what you're going to do with the lowest crisis number, right? Which is, I
Yep.
believe it's 15, right? 15's as low as it
Yep.
goes.
It used
Um,
to be 14.
yeah.
Shout out to Keebler, who still talks about missing Gamma at 14, I believe it was,
Yeah,
but
yeah. He loves low point games.
he does.
Yeah, so always make sure you can do 15 points whenever you're building a list, right?
Mhm.
And yeah, I think that's a good 101.
Absolutely.
And we did it within a reasonable amount of time. So here we are. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Join us next time as we continue our list building series.